Okay, welcome to another story by Paul Jennings from Spookiest Stories. I'm going to read Sneeze and Coffin. The reporter looked at Tracy with a smile. "I'd like to talk to you about your job," he said. It would make a good story for the paper. Not many teenagers go into this line of work. Just how did you get started in it in the first place? "Well," answered Tracy, "it all began when Mum told me she was going to remarry." "Sorry," said Mum, "but I'm getting married whether you like it or not." "But Mum," I started off. "No buts," she cut in. "I'm lonely at night when you and Andy have gone to bed, and anyway, I love Ralph. He is a lovely man. I thought you'd like him too." "I do," I said. "It's not him I don't like, it's his job. He buries people in the cemetery." "That's What's that got to do with it?" she said hotly. "I'm not going to stop loving Ralph just because he's an undertaker." "You don't judge people by their job." "It's embarrassing," I said. "Last night he took us down the street to the fish and chip shop in his funeral wagon. Do you realise that our tea was brought home in a hearse? The same car that is used to cart dead bodies around. All the children were laughing. One idiot lay down on the footpath with a flower in his mouth as he went by and pretended he was dead. Old Mr. Manor takes his hat off as we go past. It's an absolute pits going round in a hearse. Why doesn't he get a normal car like other people?" "Ralph can't afford another car at the moment," said Mum sadly. "Business has been bad lately." "I suppose he's waiting for an active maniac to move into the town, or perhaps things could pick up if we introduce the bubonic plague." "That's not funny," Mum yelled. She was starting to get angry, so I decided to give in. Anyway, I had to agree with her. Ralph was a nice bloke. It was just bad luck that he'd made his living by burying dead people and animals. That's something else I should mention. He had a pet cemetery as well. He used to collect dead pets and bury them in a little plot just outside of town. Well, Mum and Ralph got married, and my little brother Andy and I had a new stepfather. We all went off to the snowfields together on the honeymoon. In the hearse, of course. I tried everything I could think of to talk Ralph out of taking the hearse, but it was no use. "It's just right for the snow," he said. "We can put the skis in the back and there's plenty of room for the luggage." It was terrible. A real shame job. Every day we arrived at the bottom of the ski slope in a grey hearse with "R. Henderson Budget Funerals and Pet Interment" written on the door. People came rushing over to see who had been killed. At lunchtime, he would get out our portable barbecue and set it up behind the wagon. Ralph would cook chops and steak. A man came over and said that he knew that beef was expensive at the moment, but wasn't this going a bit far? We were the laughing stock of the ski slope. People called us the ski cannibals. I was glad when the honeymoon was over. It was a nightmare. Not that things improved when we got home. They didn't. Ralph moved in with us, and straight away a workshop at the bottom of the yard. "What's it for?" I asked. "Why hasn't it got any windows?" He looked furtively. "Don't tell Andy," he said. "Your little brother is too young to understand. It's a workshop for coffins." "What?" I screamed. "What will my girlfriends think if they know we have coffins at the bottom of the garden?" "Don't tell them," said Ralph. "What they don't know won't hurt them." "But I know," I retorted. "I'll never get sleep knowing there's coffins in our home." "Don't be so sensitive," said Ralph. "They are just coffins. We wouldn't bring a corpse back here. They stay at the funeral parlour until the burial. You should try to get used to it. One day I am going to take you in as a partner in the business of my dead body." Ralph didn't even crack a smile. He had his heart set on me joining the business. He looked so upset that I even felt a bit sorry for him. Just then Andy came into the room. "What are those things that you are making?" he asked, pointing at 3 half-finished coffins. Ralph didn't bat an eyelid. "Boats," he lied. "I'm making some boats." Andy was only 7. He believed it. "Wow," he said. "Fantastic." It was a stupid thing to say, and I knew it would cause trouble. I wasn't wrong. 2 years later, when I was at home on my own, the phone rang. It was Portland Police. They asked me to come down to the main beach at once. When I got there, I saw the most humiliating thing of my life. The beach was lined with hundreds of people, all of them shrieking with laughter. Some of them were rolling around on the sand, holding their sides. They were all laughing at the same thing. My brother Andy, who was paddling coffin around in the water among the swimmers. He had loaded the coffin up on my surfboard trailer and pulled it down to the beach behind his bike. Then he had launched it into the water. He really thought it was a boat. I couldn't believe it. Of course, the whole thing was in the paper and on TV. The whole family was disgraced. Everyone knew that my little brother had been standing around in a coffin. I couldn't look at the girls at school in the eye for months. And Ralph didn't even care. It was a good coffin, he said. It didn't even leak one drop. After that, things went from bad to worse. Mum decided I would have to help Ralph on weekends as he couldn't afford to pay his helper overtime. I'm not going near a corpse, I said. No way. Ralph looked hurt. He really hoped I would become an undertaker like him. That's right, he said. You can help with the pet side of the business. I don't expect you to go to the funerals of people just yet. This didn't sound too bad, but in fact it turned out to be another disaster. Ralph used to pick up people's dead pets in hers and take them out to the pet cemetery. It was amazing what some people would do. There were little graves for dogs and cats and canaries and mice and rabbits. They're big graves too. You name it and it was buried. A lot of people think that their pets are human. You take old Miss Trapp, for example. She wanted a special funeral for her cat Fibble. Come round at 4 o'clock and fetch him, she said on the phone. I want a proper burial with a priest and a hearse and flowers. Nothing is too good for my poor Fibble. I could hear her sniffling on the other end of the phone. I shook my head. I just couldn't understand it. Fancy paying money to have a funeral for a cat. Good, said Ralph. 4 o'clock will be fine. I have to do a pick-up at the zoo at 3. We can call at Miss Trapp's house for Fibble on the way back. I groaned. What died at the zoo? I hope it wasn't an elephant. No, said Ralph. It's a baby giraffe. When we reached the zoo, Mr. Proud, the director, was standing next to his poor dead giraffe. He was upset. I want you to do a good job, he said. Dig a nice deep hole. I want this giraffe to rest in peace. Be careful with him. His last journey should be slow, dignified and gentle. I am going to drive to the pet cemetery and make sure you do it properly. His eyes were red and swollen. I could see he loved his giraffe a lot. He drove to the cemetery and left us to load up the giraffe. It was only a big one, but it was heavy. And it was too big for the trailer. Its long neck and head hung over its back and touched the ground. You can't have that, said Ralph. He tied a rope around its little horns and pulled. The giraffe's head lifted up off the ground. There's no way to tie it up and stop the head from drooping, Ralph told me. You will have to stand in the trailer on top of the giraffe and pull on the rope to keep its head up in the air. You're joking, I exclaimed. No, said Ralph. It's the only way. I'll drive slowly so you don't fall off. Without another word, he climbed in the hearse and started to drive away. I only just had time to scramble on the dead giraffe and pull up its head. We went out of the zoo and along the street. Did the giraffe go round the back way so no one could see us? No, he didn't. We went straight through the middle of the town. You can imagine what we looked like. A hearse, followed by a trailer with a dead giraffe on it. And on the top of the giraffe, a girl hanging onto a rope, trying to keep its head from drooping on the ground. It brought the traffic to a standstill. Everyone yelled and shouted. People rushed out of the shop to see the sight. It was worse than Andy in his coffin boat. We stopped at every traffic light, exposed for all to see. I have never been more ashamed in my life. And there was more to come. My arms started to get tired. The giraffe's neck was rather heavy. The head drooped closer and closer to the road until at last I started to rub on the tarmac. I heaved it up, but I couldn't hold it for long. Stop! I screamed to Ralph. Stop! His head is rubbing on the ground. Ralph kept going. He was listening to the grand final on the radio and couldn't hear me, so he kept on all the way to the pet cemetery. The poor giraffe's head must have been banging on the road 100 times. When we finally arrived, Mr. Proud was waiting for us, dabbing his red eyes with a handkerchief. He walked over to the dead giraffe to inspect it. Suddenly he stopped. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. What's this? He screamed. My poor giraffe. Where is its nose? Its nose is gone. What have you done with its nose? Sorry, I said. It got rubbed off on the road. Its head was too heavy for me. You stupid girl, he yelled. You fiend. He came towards me with his hands held out like claws. He had murder in his eyes. I turned and ran. I fled down the road with the enraged Mr. Proud behind me. He chased me for miles, but in the end he gave up and went back. I walked back with tears streaming down my face. I was sick to death of Ralph and his funerals, animals and funerals. My life was turned into a complete mess. I made up my mind never to have anything to do with budget funerals. There was no way I was ever getting involved again. And as for becoming a partner in business, well, Ralph could just jump in the lake. I was sick of him. I went up to my bedroom and shut the door. I made up a big speech about how I was never going to be a partner in Ralph's funeral business. After about an hour, there was a knock on the door. Ralph stuck his head in the room. He didn't say anything about the giraffe. He shook an old jar at me. I could see a coin rattling around at the bottom. Would you sell me one of the pennies from your coin collection, he asked. I've only got one left. What do you want it for? I said suspiciously. They are hard to get. This jar used to be full, but now I only have one left. Ever since they changed to decimal currency, it has got harder and harder to get pennies. A nasty thought came into my mind. Has this got anything to do with the funeral business? Because if it has, you're not getting any of my coins. I'm fed up with you and your dead bodies. I have a man waiting for burial. Every corpse has 2 pennies, one for each eye. The spirits of the dead have no rest if they're buried without coins. I picked up a pillow and threw it at him. Buzz off, I yelled. I didn't even want to hear anything about your rotten burials again. And get it in your skull, I'm never going to work for you as an undertaker. Never. Ralph's sad head disappeared from the room. A bit later, I went downstairs. I could hear Ralph talking to Mum. I can't remember exact words, but he said something like, I'll leave the body in the workshop for tonight. I'm too tired to move at the moment. My head started to spin. This was just too much. It was the last straw. Now he had gone and brought a corpse to the home as well. He was leaving a dead body in the workshop for some reason or another, and he had promised that he would never do that. I grabbed the key and charged down the backyard of the workshop. I opened the door and rushed in, leaving the key in the lock. I looked round and sure, just as I suspected, there was a table with a new coffin. The lid was firmly closed. Ralph didn't shut the coffin lid unless there was a body inside. Boy, I was mad. I turned around just in time to see the wind blow the door shut. Immediately I found myself in the dark, in the pitch black, stumbling over to the door and trying to open it. It wouldn't budge. Ralph had fitted a new deadlock after Andy had taken the coffin out for a sow. I was locked in. I couldn't even turn the light on because the switch was on the outside. I yelled at the top of my voice and banged the door as hard as I could. It was no use. No one heard me. And after a while, I slumped on the floor. I was exhausted. It was quiet as a grave. I could hear my own heart thumping inside my chest. I was all alone in the darkness. Or was I? In the middle of the room was a coffin with a corpse in it. I started to wonder who it was. Could it be the person who Ralph had wanted the extra penny for? Was there a body in there with only 1 penny on one of its eyes? What Ralph said, the spirit would not rest without the pennies, and if it was my fault, I wouldn't give him one of mine because I was mad about the giraffe. I sat there in silence and blackness. My breath sounded as loud as a windstorm. I tried to breathe quietly. I didn't want to wake the dead. I started to think about ghosts. I imagined a ghost with one eye leering at me, coming to claim me. I told myself not to be silly. The dead didn't come back to life. I knew that. The trouble was, that sort of advice is fine when it's daytime and all your friends are about. But when you're locked in a dark, silent room with a corpse, it's quite another thing. The silence deepened. It grew dark and cold, and I started to shiver. I was too terrified to move in case a corpse hurt me. I could imagine the eyes without the penny. Was it swivelling? Was it seeking me? Then something happened which froze my blood. I heard, quite distinctly, a soft sneeze. There was no doubt about it. A sneeze had come from inside the coffin. The corpse was alive. I almost shrieked with fear, but somehow I managed to keep my self-control. I shoved my fist into my mouth and crouched lower into the corner. Had it been my imagination? Had I really heard a sneeze? I knew I had. I strained my ears in the silence. What was that? A scratching noise coming from the coffin. It was trying to get out. Merciful heavens, I mumbled. Don't let it get me. The scratching grew louder. What a fool I'd been. If only I'd given Ralph that penny when he wanted it, then that body would have lain in peace. Please come, Ralph, I whispered under my breath. Please come and save me. A wail came from the coffin. I'll do anything, Ralph. I'll be your partner, I promise. I swear that if you come now, I'll join you in the business. But just come and save me. At that moment, as if he had heard my words, Ralph opened the door and came in. The room was filled with light. Hello, he said. What are you doing in here? I pointed to the coffin. It's alive, I croaked. The body is alive. Save me. I'll be your partner. The smile vanished from his face. He walked over to the coffin and lifted up the lid. He is too, he said. He's still breathing. Miss Trapp will be pleased. Miss Trapp? I managed to gasp. What's he got to do with it? What's she got to do with it? Well, grinned Ralph as she lifted up the throw bundle. Ribble is her favourite cat.